If you're a fan of using facial oils and oil-based cleansing and like the idea of creating your own skin products, then this is the episode for you. Because today we're going to be shown how by Natasha Dauncey, who founded her own skincare brand Apothaka after turning her love of using plant and essential oils to treat her own skin into a successful business. And she'll be showing us some of the best oils we can work with at home, some tips for sourcing quality ingredients, which oils work best for different skin types, and how to keep them fresher for longer. Natasha, welcome, and thank you for being willing to show us the ropes when it comes to making our own facial oils. I'm looking forward to this.
Thank you for having me.
I've never done anything quite like it on the channel, so we can only see how it goes. And, I expect a lot of people will be quite interested in how to do this, both from a cost perspective, but also just the idea of a bit like our diet, just taking more control over what we put on our skin. And I did wonder, was it that desire from your own point of view that got you started in skincare in the first place? I mean, what got you into it?
It was actually that. I basically experienced adult onset acne quite late on. So I was in my late 30s, but my skin wasn't particularly oily. And at the time, because this is going back a while now, a lot of the treatments that were around were designed more so for oily skin. So they would be quite harsh on a kind of fairly balanced skin. And when I tried them, my skin obviously just got a lot worse. So I kind of I don't even know how I fell into it. I must have done a bit of Googling and started getting interested in plant oils and different types of plant carrier oils and understanding the profiles a little bit. And I literally just started blending things at home. And facial oils are one of the probably easiest things to create yourself in terms of being able to get hold of the materials reasonably easy. So I kind of started from there and started making this myself, and then for friends and family. Then they started offering to pay me, and I thought, oh, there may be something in this. And then I started getting a little bit more involved, and then I started getting involved in cosmetic regulation and kind of undertaking courses in formulation to kind of get a little bit more gemmed up to understand a bit more of the science behind it, I guess. So yeah, it definitely started from there, from a bit of tinkering in the kitchen.
That is such a lovely route, because did you, when you first started, you had no idea that this was going to develop into a full skincare business?
I was still working. I still had a proper job, and it was very much a hobby when it first started out because I was literally just doing it for myself more than anything else. Yeah. I think it allowed me to just experiment on my own skin, which is obviously the safest way to do it. And once I was kind of building my confidence, I was able to then just test it on my friends as the next step. But when people were offering to pay, I thought, well, maybe there is something in this, and I will need to actually kind of study it a bit more and learn a bit more about cosmetic regulation. And it really just all took off from there then.
And with the facial oils, I mean, that is a more obvious place to start and what we're going to be looking at today. But how did you find they supported your skin? So when you first started experimenting with them, what kind of response were you seeing in your skin?
There was a lot of tinkering to find the right oils as a starting point, because there's a wide variety of oils and they all have different profiles, not only in terms of how they feel, but in terms of their nutrient properties as well. And we can look at some of the colours and absorbency speeds later on. But also, given that I had acne, not all oils are suitable for acne-prone skin, and actually a lot of them can clog pores. So you do have to be careful with what you're using. And there's also a lot of really quite awful recipes online that people can follow, which I then became much more aware of as I started to study more around this and learn the science behind it. So I found that when I found the right sorts of oil that suited my skin, so they weren't heavy oils that clogged my pores, I found that my skin became a little bit more balanced and a little bit more calm. And it's not surprising, really, because when you look at some of the profiles of oils, some of them do have like anti-inflammatory, calming and soothing properties for the skin. So it's not really a surprise that you'd see that sort of benefit when you start using them. But it's also around how you incorporate them into your skincare routine as well, because they're not, as much as I love oils, they're not the be all and end all of a skincare routine. And I think sometimes people can kind of jump to that sort of extreme where they're just using oils and then not using anything else. And actually your skin needs a little bit of everything. So they are great. I love them and I still use them regularly in my routine, and I tweak them. I mean, that's the beauty of having access to a lot of different oils, is that I can tweak them according to what I know my skin needs at the time. And that has changed with age, actually. So as I've become more perimenopausal and my skin has dried out, I found that I can better tolerate and respond to oils that I wouldn't have necessarily reached for, 8 years ago, 10 years ago when I first started doing this. So it's been interesting from that point of view to sort of see that progression and how my skin's needs change and how I can then adapt what I'm using to that.
Only in the last couple of years have I started using oils. I mean, when I was younger, my face, it had a permanent glow. Let's just put it that way. I could have lived and breathed the glass skin look all day long. But I find that oils on drier, let's face it, menopausal skin, women in our 50s, the oils have been a real blessing for me, and I seem to be able to tolerate them well. But also I just get the sense that they're kind of like locking in moisture. There's just something about using oils that has been so beneficial for my own skin. And so they become morning and night. I would use them now, nighttime, both times really with the moisturizer, because in the morning I'll use a kind of moisturizing SPF after I've applied the oil. And at night, I would probably add a couple of drops of oil to my moisturizer, because I find that most moisturizers just don't give me enough, or what I'm looking for at night. And just 1 or 2 drops of oil, that just seems to do it for me. So it's definitely very much on my radar. I mean, are they suited to all skin types, do you think? Is there an oil for every skin type, or is there a type of skin that really it's most appropriate for?
I think when you touched on dry skin, that in particular can benefit probably the most of all skin types. But I think there is probably an oil for everyone. But if we look at the reason why, it's not that surprising. So you've heard probably the brick and mortar analogy of your skin before, haven't you? Where the bricks are your skin cells. And your cells are more water loving. So they like the water loving ingredients, which is why I think you need a bit of the both. But in between all those cells you've got your what's called the mortar, which is the lipids, your skin's lipids, which deplete as you get older and your skin gets drier. And if you're of the sort of type of skin, even when you're younger, you have typically dry skin, you will be lacking in oils, which is why people find when they've got dry skin, if they use something they're very heavy oil based or waxy, their skin sort of almost like sucks it up and really needs it. So it's not surprising that a dry skin type benefits the most from oils, because you're literally just kind of feeding that lipid layer that your skin actually contains anyway, that is part of the skin surface, and it needs it and benefits from it.
I like that analogy. Do you know, I hadn't actually heard that one, and it's really nice. That's helped me understand that a little better.
Oh, that's good. That's good to know, because I always feel when I'm saying it, I feel like everyone's heard it, but it's a really nice way of thinking about the skin, because it helps explain why the skin needs slightly different elements and why you can benefit from the ingredients in your moisturizer, which have a water component as well as an oil component, as well as the kind of purely oil-based anhydrous products as well. Oils act as, the reason people notice the benefits of them is they act as emollients, they're skin softeners. So when you put them on your skin immediately feels softer and smoother. It loses the roughness that dry skin has, which is why you often notice immediate benefit. And it gives that kind of glow to your skin that everyone kind of associates with skin health. So it's not surprising people put oils on and think, oh, wow, I can see an immediate benefit, because it has that kind of instant impact. Perhaps less so with an oilier skin type that has a lot of sebum in their skin anyway and isn't really lacking in skin lipids. That's not to say that they can't benefit from oils, but they probably don't need them as much as someone with a dry skin type, for example. And that explains probably why I can kind of reach for them much more now that I'm older. I'm 10 years older than when I started this all off. I reach for them a lot more than I used to.
As we go through, looking at a couple of the oils that you're going to show us today, can we also touch on the oils that might work best for different skin types as we go along?
I mean, we can start by just talking about fatty acid profiles, because that's what distinguishes different oils from each other very broadly. I mean, there's lots of other elements as well.
Okay.
But you've probably heard of oleic acid, linoleic acid. I mean, you have
Yep.
that in oils that you consume as well, so it's no different really. Linoleic acid, typically the oils that you find that are high in linoleic acid are lighter weight oils. They usually are fast absorbing, but there are always exceptions to all of this. So, for example, like wheat germ oil is high linoleic, but it's actually quite a cloying, heavy oil, and it's actually more comedogenic than some of the other oils. And one of the reasons I got into high linoleic oils when I was younger was they're really good for acne prone skin, or they're better for acne prone skin because they're less likely to clog pores.
Okay. And we don't want that.
Not always, but a more kind of normal balanced skin. But they can be also helpful for dry skin as well. People that have got drier skin can also benefit from oleic acid, and that's the oils you can find in things like olive oil, macadamia oil, for example, which are quite popular oils, I would say. And you'd find as you probably get older or drier, you might notice that your skin seems to enjoy those more because they tend to be slightly richer in terms of texture compared to the high linoleic acid oils.
Yeah.
So there are other fatty profiles as well, fatty acid profiles as well, but those are the ones where I see most of distinction in terms of guiding people in terms of how to choose. The other area is kind of more of your more solid fats or oils like coconut oil, which is like solid at room temperature. That's very rich in palmitic acid. I'm not personally a massive fan of coconut oil, and I know some people, particularly people that tend to go down the natural route, will say that they use coconut oil for everything on their face, their hair. I find it very heavy and greasy personally. So it's...
Yeah, I was going to say, I love cooking with coconut oil. I use it in my curries every Friday night. But I have tried putting it on my face, and that's the kind of thing that I find just a little bit irritating.
Yeah, it's heavy as well. It's a heavy oil and it's greasy. It tends to sit on my oil. So these are all factors when you're choosing oil. It's the fatty acid profile, but it's also the texture and viscosity, how well it absorbs into the skin. Some are very slow absorbing.
Yeah, I don't think it absorbs well into the skin as well. When I was thinking about it, that was the other thing. It was sitting on the skin for quite a while. I thought,
and that's
not going to
partially
work.
explained by the fatty acid profile, but there are other elements as well. It's also solid at room temperature, which has something to do with it as well. So all of those factor in how I choose oils, as well as the color, the smell. Some oils have got very strong, not very pleasant smell. So I don't know if you've smelt neem oil, for example. Neem oil is very popular in India, and actually it's fantastic. If you've got spots as a spot treatment, it's fantastic. But the smell is so intense that it would put probably most people off using it. I did buy a bottle when I was in India, and I bring a little bottle and I use it. I get it out every so often if I've got a little spot, and I might dab some on because it's not drying like a kind of acne type solution would be. You know how they tend to dry out spots. This is an oil, so it tends to kind of give that emolliency, but there are some elements to it that are reportedly meant to help with spots. So the smell is I think quite important when if I'm as a brand, if I'm trying to sell an oil, I'm not going to choose oils that might have great properties but they smell really offensive, and then you have to mask it with loads of essential oils. And the other element is also shelf life. So one of the benefits of buying facial oils from small brands is that they tend to use unrefined oils as opposed to the refined versions. And unrefined oils, they tend to have a much richer colour, but they also retain more of the nutrients, which is not really surprising. Even if you think back to the cooking analogy, if you're cooking with extra virgin oil, you tend to save that for salads, for example. You're not necessarily going to cook that at a really high temperature and destroy the nutrient benefits that it has. So the same principle applies to oils that you put on your face. So for me, being able to create small batches of face oils fresh using unrefined oils will give your skin the sort of extra nutrients that you can benefit from. Whereas if you're buying something from a large drugstore that's been sitting on the shelf and it's been designed to sit on the shelf for three years, they are going to use refined oils, and you can usually tell because they're stripped of their color. So they tend to be clearer.
Okay.
They tend to, they don't have that color that you have with, I'll show you some of the oils that I use. The color is a really good signal of how unrefined the oil is.
Yeah, that's a really good pointer. That's good to know.
If you're shopping for oils, if you don't have the patience to make it at home and and I will say oil prices have risen considerably in the last few years. I've noticed it ever since basically the pandemic. The prices have shot up of certain oils, and I'm not talking about, just small percentages. I'm talking about doubling or tripling of prices, which is huge when you're making anhydrous products. So it's if you decide you want to buy an oil rather than to make an oil, it's worth looking at smaller brands rather than buying it from, your local Boots or whatever.
Can I ask you about castor oil, actually,
Yeah.
just when we were talking about the different types of oil there, because obviously it has had its season and then some.
It has, yeah, it's really trended, isn't it?
I mean, I use it a little bit at night around my eyes. It's as part of another formula, actually, but it is included in that formula. And I just sometimes dot it round instead of something like Vaseline, just because, again, I just think it kind of, a bit like how people wear the eye patches sometimes. I do think it helps lock in moisture. But I think it's got a bit of a scent to it, and it's really quite heavy. I mean, are you a fan of the castor oil, or what do
I
you think to it?
love castor oil for certain specific uses, and I use it in my cleansing oils, actually. It's great for cleansing. One of the reasons it's great is it's very viscous, which you can use to its benefit, because when you're cleansing with an oil, you want the oil to sit on the surface of your skin so that you can massage and get slip. So it's actually a really useful property to have in a cleansing oil, which is one of the reasons I use it. I don't use it in a very high concentration because it is quite, it can be too cleansing. So it can draw out quite a lot from your skin, and it can actually make it feel, ironically, quite dry. So you have to be careful with the concentration of it. But as part of a cleansing oil, I think it's fantastic. I don't use it neat on the skin. I know some people are crazy about it. Under the eye, skin under the eye is very thin, and I think you have to be careful with how heavy the products you put on, because it can potentially drag down the skin with the weight of it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, no, good point. Yeah, that's interesting, actually, because I'm just kind of daubing it around here, but I'll be careful about that.
Well, you go by how your skin's responding. I mean, because everyone's going to
Yeah.
respond differently to things. So if you're finding that it's actually helping, then by all means carry on. I just find, and it's not only to do with oils, even with creams, anything that goes in the eye area, I tend to err on the side of caution and say don't go too heavy, because you don't want to weigh down that skin, because you're actually going to contribute to it making it worse and dragging it down.
Yeah, well, we don't want anything that contributes to that. So what have you got to share with us today then, in your little magic pots and potions?
Obviously, I love lots of different oils. So one of these in particular is my all-time favorite oil, and the reason I love it is because I think it was fairly instrumental in helping calm my skin down, and that is hemp seed oil. Now, not only is the color glorious, can you see how dark that green is?
Oh, yes. Yeah.
It almost looks black. And this one does have a scent to it. This is unrefined. It's cold pressed. So the way that oils are processed obviously has an impact on how the nutrients are retained. So cold processed is the kind of the best way to retain as many of the nutrients as possible. The more that hemp seed oil is refined, because you can get refined version of this, it becomes clearer and clearer and lighter, and it loses its smell altogether. So like I said before, it's a really good way of telling how unrefined the oils are that you're using on your skin. I love this. It's really calming. It's very lightweight oil. It's kind of, it sinks into the skin. It's probably got an average absorbency, I would say. So it's not like one of the thinnest, lightest oils, but it's not like coconut oil that sits on your skin for ages either. It's kind of in the middle. This is why I think it's really important to blend oils. So I don't use a single oil neat on my face. I tend to blend, because that way you can optimize the final texture and the skin feel, rather than just kind of using one.
And would putting that neat onto your skin, would it either color the skin, or what a lot of people ask me about with different formulations is, if you've got a white pillowcase or whatever at night, is that going to then color the pillowcase?
That's the other reason I'd be very careful about using these undiluted. That one's probably not as bad as one of the other ones I brought to show you, which is sea buckthorn oil. Do you want to see that now? Because that's bright orange.
And now sea buckthorn oil, that's really packed with the old antioxidants, isn't it?
It's great, and it's very rich in vitamin A, vitamin E. And vitamin A, obviously, we're all obsessed with vitamin A because of retinoids and all of that and what they can do for the skin. It is said that it's also anti-inflammatory, but it potentially can help with pigmentation. I don't know how true these things are. They'll make all sorts of claims about oils. But
Yes.
it's this in one in particular, this is known to stain. So generally, if you're using it, you use it at very low concentration in a blend. So probably not more than probably 5% max, and that's quite high, because any more than that and you will start to stain your pillowcases and even your face, especially if you're quite fair skinned. I might get away with it.
Yeah.
But, yeah, you wouldn't want to try that if you're very fair skinned.
Yeah, I do find if I, if it's about 8 o'clock or whatever, and I do my skincare routine then, and so, it's a couple of hours before I go to bed, I do think that helps with staining and that kind of thing on the pillows, because it's had time to sort of absorb by then. But yeah, if you're just doing something and then going straight to bed, that's when you start to see more of the colouring. The retinaldehyde, I know you just launched a retinaldehyde. A lot of them have a kind of yellow, the ones I've used are all, they've got a colour to them. And again, that can be, if you go straight to bed after putting them on, that can stain a little. Yeah.
And if you saw the original raw material, the retinol powder, it is very, very yellow, like bright yellow. So it's always going to colour and formulation. So your end serum will always be very yellow. And yeah, absolutely, it can stain. If you put it on and then go straight to bed, you're going to wake up with a yellow retinol-filled pillowcase.
But I tell you what, it's great stuff.
It is great stuff.
It's my favourite retinoid by a long way. It's just, it's brilliant for being gentle on the skin, but it really does the job.
I find, that's kind of one of the reasons I didn't move away from oils, but I started to kind of learn a little bit more about what else was out there. And a lot of the great skincare actives are not oil-based. They're not oil-soluble, they're water-soluble, which is another reason why I think you can't just use oils in your skincare. You need to have some water-based products in there as well in order to get the benefit of all of those lovely water-based actives. So it's a little bit of everything in moderation. But retinol, yeah, definitely one of my favourite. Again, that was a massive game changer for my skin. That was probably the thing that actually fully cleared my skin. So the oils helped to calm it down, but it didn't get rid of the acne. It was actually retinol that cleared everything.
Well, I put my son on it. He was really struggling. He's only 20, and I didn't really want to, because I said, well, if you start using this, then you're going to have to apply sunscreen every day. And but he was just up for when he hit 20, he was up for having a skincare routine. So he uses the retinaldehyde, I think every other day now, because his skin improves so dramatically. So, cut your frequency down to what is effective at the lowest frequency.
Absolutely.
We've had the hemp seed oil there.
Yes, so that's the high linoleic oil, rich in omega-3, 6, anti-inflammatory, good for, not only just for acne, it's actually really good for eczema. I know I'm not meant to talk about skincare in the context of medical conditions, but it can be very helpful as a supportive ingredient for conditions like that because of its anti-inflammatory calming abilities. I've been using hemp seed for like 10 years now, and I've always loved it. But I remember in the early days of using it, it got quite a lot of bad press because I think people confused it with THC, and CBD and all that kind of stuff. And I remember actually a long time ago trying to list my products, I was getting pushback from a lot of the websites saying, is this cannabis because of the Latin name? And I was like, no, there's no drugs in this at all. It's literally just hemp seed oil. And eventually they kind of like figured it out and it was all fine. But it's hands down one of my favorite oils. If I could put it in any oil blend I make, that would be the oil that goes in there. So that's that one. The buckthorn is also cold pressed, which is why it's so orange. There's two types of sea buckthorn, actually. There's the fruit, which is this one, which is very orange. And then there's the seed version as well, which I think is probably a little bit lighter. And I'm not sure how different their properties are, but I've always felt like the fruit oil has kind of got more, I think it's the colour. You see the colour, you think, oh, that's going to have more goodness in it. So I've stuck with it. Very rich in vitamin E and A, as I said. It's said to have antimicrobial properties. I don't know, again, how evident that is when you're using very small concentrations in a blend. but it's, I think, one of the reasons why it's quite popular, and it's got kind of like healing abilities as well. The final one I wanted to show you was one of my other favourites, which is jojoba.
Oh,
Often
yes.
called liquid gold. And again, this is an unrefined version, so you can get refined jojoba as well, which is much lighter in colour. This is actually not an oil. It's quite an interesting one. It's actually technically considered a wax, even though it's liquid at room temperature. But if the temperature starts to drop just a little bit, and it was really cold in the house, you'd start to see wax forming, and you'd see like these white little balls forming.
Oh, yeah.
So it starts to solidify. What's interesting about this one, it's got quite a unique profile, which I don't think many other oils share, but it's meant to closely resemble the skin sebum, which is why it's got like a particular affinity with the skin. So it tends to suit most skin types. I love this, not only for my face, but I actually use this in my nail oil because I make a nail oil. It's really good for moisturizing the nail plate. And it's one of those oils that sinks in quite nicely. It's got a nice kind of lightness to it, not too heavy, but it does feel like it's got something substantive to it when you apply it. So you'll notice it. It's incredibly expensive. Again, it's one of those ones that was always expensive,
Right.
but it's gone up considerably in price. But it's a lovely, lovely oil. And there aren't that many other oils that can be substituted for it, which also affects the price as well. So that's again.
Okay, let's just give a couple of examples of skin types. Okay, so I mean, I look at aging on the channel, so let's go with the kind of older audience there. So for very dry menopausal skin, you want to make your own oil. What would you be putting in that?
Okay, I would put, considering that, assuming they're not overly sensitive or anything like that, I would go for some slightly weighty oils, but I would also balance it off with some lighter oils as well. Because what you don't want, even though you've got very dry skin, you don't want like an oil slick sitting over your face. You want it to sink in. So I would probably pick, and this is not in any particular order, just as I'm looking at them, sea buckthorn would definitely be in there in a very small amount. I would probably use some jojoba just because it's got a nice weight to it, but it's quite moisturizing as well. I'd probably also use a little bit of hemp seed. I'd use lots of different oils, to be quite honest with you. I would also use oils that we've not talked about that are quite, don't even know how to describe them, but they are richer. So something like prickly pear oil. I don't know if you've ever used that
Prickly
before.
pear,
Yeah. That's got it's got a bit more of a richness to it, which I think would suit a more mature skin type better. It is quite an expensive oil, so it's quite difficult to get hold of because it's only made in certain parts of the world. In fact, I bought some when I was in Morocco because it's made a lot there in Morocco. But it feels really nice on a more mature skin, and it's probably something I wouldn't have appreciated 10 years ago, but now my skin kind of quite likes the feel of it. It feels quite rich and velvety without feeling too cloying. What else would I put in? Now, I would then balance it with some lighter, almost like esters, they're kind of derivatives of oil, but they help thin out the oil while still giving some emolliency. So you've probably heard of olive squalane. That's a really popular one. Have you heard of squalane? Squalane.
I've heard of squalane, yeah.
It's derived from olives. Again, quite expensive for a material, but it is a lovely, lovely ingredient because it's quite thin.
Very popular ingredient.
Yeah, it's thin, but it feels quite substantive on the skin, and it's actually quite it's quite occlusive in a good way. So when your skin is dry, you want more occlusive agents, but some occlusive agents can feel too heavy on the skin. So take Vaseline, for example. So petrolatum is probably one of the most occlusive ingredients, and it's really good if your skin is uber dry and like literally nothing is staying in because you're losing everything. It basically holds all the moisture in your skin because it forms almost like a seal.
Yes, which is why it's kind of good for skin barrier repair because you're almost replacing it.
But it doesn't feel particularly lovely on the skin, does it? Another ingredient is dimethicone, which is obviously not natural, but it's a very effective occlusive. And I use it in a lot of my products that are aimed more at dry skin because it's more effective even than oils at holding moisture in. But squalane is quite occlusive, despite the fact that it's got this very lightweight, silky texture. So it can improve the texture of the oil if you want the oil to feel nice on your skin when you're applying it, but also give that benefit of emolliency as well. So that's a really good one. So I tend to use that in all my oil blends because I really love it. And even for skin that isn't particularly dry, I think olive squalane is still quite a good choice for like an all-rounder, I would say. Another ester that's quite similar to that is actually it's known as capric triglyceride, which is a bit of a mouthful, but it's derived from coconut oil. So even though I'm not a massive fan of coconut oil, this is it's like a clear liquid. Again, it looks like it's similar in texture and feel to olive squalane, but it has a similar effect. It kind of thins out any oil blend and it makes it feel like it absorbs easier into the skin whilst also giving some emolliency. So you're still getting the benefits of all the nutrients from your plant carrier oils, but you're also getting the kind of the texture, sensorial profile that you kind of want in a face oil, because I don't really want to look like I'm like a rotisserie chicken when I'm put a load of oil on. I want it to sink in and soften my skin and make it feel good, but I don't want it to look overly shiny.
In terms of measurements, I guess people have to sort of play it by ear on what works best for their skin, sort of tinker around with it. But generally, what kind of ratios are we talking about with these different oils?
I think aside from the very coloured oils like sea buckthorn and even hemp seed, you can be guided by how your skin responds. So there isn't a set rule on any of these. You could start really simple. You could almost start with something that has just squalane in it and add one of the carrier oils of your choice, plant oils, just to see how your skin responds. And then if you think, oh, I need something a little bit richer, you could add something that's richer in oleic acid. So, for example, at that point, I might bring in macadamia oil. That's one of the ones I use if I want something richer in oleic acid. And so there's a bit of tweaking involved, because I think everyone's going to want something slightly different out of an oil, which is quite difficult to say for sure. The only rules really are the sort of coloured oils, so that they don't stay in the skin. The other thing you need to bear in mind is the shelf life. So if you're using unrefined oils, they don't keep as well. So if you're using something that's primarily something that goes rancid really quickly, let me think of an example. Not one that I use because it goes rancid very quickly, is blackcurrant. Is it blackcurrant seed oil? Or there's another one, pomegranate oil. They go rancid very, very quickly. So if you used something that was predominantly one of those with a very short shelf life, you're basically reducing the shelf life by having just that and not using anything else. So sometimes adding oils that are more shelf stable can increase the overall shelf life. And you would need to add vitamin E to a blend, because vitamin E is an antioxidant. So again, it extends the shelf life and stops the oils going rancid.
Right, okay.
They can go rancid quite quickly if they're not stored well. So another thing to bear in mind is if you're buying oils from a shop or oil blends from a shop, you want to buy ones in coloured or dark bottles. Don't buy them in clear glass bottles.
A bit like when we buy our olive oil or whatever, we're told buy it in a dark glass bottle.
And it's not just an aesthetic thing. It's actually really important for reducing the UV, which is what helps the oils go off quickly.
Yeah.
And you can tell when an oils go off because it smells like crayons. It's like a really weird smell when an oil goes off. It's got quite a distinctive smell, which you'll notice, and it starts to kind of get like solid particles building up around the neck as well. So the way you you store your oils is really important. So keep the bottles tightly closed, dark bottles, keep them in a ideally cool, dark place. Don't leave them out on bathroom shelf. Keep them in a cupboard if you can, because these are all things that will help, extend or prolong the shelf life of your oil.
You talked about just adding vitamin D there, E there rather, as the antioxidant. I mean, presumably that's one of the great benefits of oils, is that we don't really need many preservatives in them. So they're one of the things that we can use on our skin that is pretty close to natural, maybe as close to natural as it gets in modern skincare.
Yes. So preservatives are only required when you use in water-based products or largely water-based products. If you're using something that is purely made up of oils and waxes, so there's no water content at all, then you can generally get away without having to use a preservative. So in my face oils, I don't use preservatives. Vitamin E is not a preservative, it's an antioxidant. So it doesn't give you any antimicrobial protection. It gives you extended shelf life. It helps extend the shelf life of your oil. So That's the main reason to use it. And it's quite an effective, you only need a very tiny amount. So I'm talking about like 0.5% or less. And that would be enough to extend the shelf life of your blend.
And how long on average do you think for the average oil and the average blend, how long is that shelf life, do you think?
So if I think about how I make oils and then sell them, I make them in very small batches anyway, so they're not sitting around for too long. But unopened, they can probably last at least a year, if not longer. There's a difference between, so they don't go off in this instance, but they can lose their nutrient benefits the longer you leave them lying around, which is why it's always best to buy them fresh and use them straight away, rather than buy in bulk and having them sit around for a while. So say, for example, when I always buy oils in bulk, but I still buy the right size according to how quickly I'll go through them. So I never have an oil sitting around for longer than like 6 months at a time, which is actually quite short. But so your typical average blend, I think once it's opened, I would say use it within 6 months. If you're using very short life shelves, I'd go even faster. But you can be ruled by your nose generally by looking at smelling the oil, and if it starts to go rancid, you'll know pretty quickly. It's not going to necessarily harm your skin, but it just won't be very pleasant to use, and you're probably not enjoying all the nutrient benefits that it would have had when it was fresh.
Is there anything you would use in particular for maybe age damaged skin? So I'm talking about more compromised skin, skin that might be prone to redness and irritation, and might be showing more signs of pigmentation and sun damage and that kind of thing. Where would you go on that? Similar to what we talked about with just the sort of dry, generally aged skin, or is there a more specific route you would go down?
I think for redness and irritation, oils can definitely help with that. So even something like hemp seed, because it's calming, you might find it might help with redness and irritation because of its soothing properties. There's other oils like, so calendula is not an oil as such, but it's basically an infusion of the herb in a suitable carrier oil, which I use. And calendula is very soothing. So if you had very irritated skin, I would use like a calendula infusion within your blend too. So if I look at my comforting oil booster, which is designed specifically for irritated skin, the main ingredients are hemp seed, there's squalane in there, there's calendula in there, there's jojoba in there, there's a whole load of different things. Those are the sorts of ingredients I would lean into for that sort of skin type. With aged, damaged skin, it's a bit more difficult because I think there's a limit to what oils will do. Part of the reason skin is more prone to damage is because it's dry. So oils will help to an extent in terms of replenishing that oil, but they're not necessarily going to reverse the pigmentation, for example, that you have. You really need hard hitting actives for that. And even those, it's kind of dubious as to how much difference they actually make, because it's all part of, a cocktail of using sunscreen, diligently avoiding sun exposure, and then using kind of pigment inhibitors. And even those have a hard time. Sometimes you need proper cosmetic treatments, like laser, etc.
I had this conversation the other day with a skin scientist, and we talked about using laser, some of the more extreme laser treatments, as a bit of a reset for very age damaged skin, and that is probably the route I would go down myself if I had a lot of pigmentation and very obvious damage there.
There's a tendency to kind of believe that oils can fix everything, and I think they are brilliant. They've got some great properties, but they aren't the panacea of skincare. They have their limitations just like everything else. So I think we probably need to be realistic about what we can achieve with oils. But I'd say if it's anything to do with dry skin, replenishing lipids, irritated skin that needs calming and soothing, then oils can absolutely make a difference to your skin in those sorts of instances.
For people who just have a normal skin type, they're not particular issues either way, not too oily, not too dry, but just want to have a bit of a go at getting into the oils and making their own. What would you be recommending for them?
For those, I would still say that something like olive squalane would be a good base, or the caprylic triglycerides as well, but then blending it with either jojoba, a little bit of hemp seed. There's other oils that I absolutely love that I haven't even mentioned because I didn't show them today. Safflower is very similar in terms of the texture and feel to hemp seed, and it's a relatively inexpensive oil. But it's a lovely oil that suits most skin types, I would say, including normal. You could try something like, I haven't mentioned argan oil, which I don't know if it still is, it used to be very popular when I started kind of dabbling with oils. But again, the unrefined version's got a quite distinctive scent to it, which is not particularly pleasant. So it's not one that I
Right.
find myself reaching for. But in terms of properties, it's a really good oil. So if you can get past the smell, then it might be worth
Yeah.
considering. So I'm kind of, when I'm suggesting things, I'm taking into account all of those elements rather than just the, nutrient qualities of the oil. You see what I mean?
I'm now sort of thinking twice of an oil. I can't actually remember the brand, but it was one that I was sent recently. And it was so strong smelling. It was like almost, it was curry powder through the oil. It was very rich in colour.
Bet you it was tamanu
And
oil. Tamanu oil?
I'll need to go and look now
I can
because I
almost
thought,
guarantee.
wow, I mean, I could smell it all evening. I could smell it on my hands and on my skin.
When I first started out, I probably bought every oil imaginable so that I could test them and try them and see how they would fit into blends. So I worked with a lot of oils, and a lot of them got discarded very quickly for very different reasons. But that was one of them. Tamanu oil has got great healing properties, but the smell of it is so strong. I can usually spot a mile off without even looking at the ingredients list if it's in there, and it's similar sort of scent to neem oil. So if you didn't like that, don't even try the neem.
Yeah, well, when you mentioned neem oil, I thought, I wonder if that's in that product that I was sent.
I want you to check and tell me now because I want to know, but I can almost guarantee it was one of
I
the
will, and then I'll put it on screen so people can see. I don't want to name and shame because you know what? It felt great on my skin, and it was just one of those that I thought, I wonder how many of them they sell because there's such a pungent smell to it, but nice product, sank nicely into the skin and all the rest of it. But the smell actually has to be factored in, definitely.
It really does. So that's kind of one of my considerations for the oils I've ended up with, that I've settled with, are the ones that are best in terms of they have the nutrient benefits to offer. They've got the right sort of texture. They don't clog pores. They feel lovely on the skin, and they don't smell offensive. Those are all things that sort of factor in, and the shelf life as well. It all factors into the final decision as to how I put the blend together.
We started off, you mentioned acne prone skin, and that was something that you experienced in earlier adulthood. What would you recommend in that situation?
Hemp seed for sure. Now this is not, I'd be cautious about this in someone who had very oily acne prone skin, just because
you don't want to be adding more oil. You want to be drying that out.
Yeah, and if you speak to any dermatologist, they would be absolutely horrified at the idea of suggesting an oil for oily acne prone skin. And I kind of see where they're coming from. I don't think it's the answer to everything. That said, anecdotally, some people will tell you that they probably have benefited from using oils, even with acne prone skin. But I think it depends on what's causing your acne, because it's got so many different components to it. It's not just the oiliness of the skin. It's the kind of like the components of the sebum and how sticky it gets, which was my issue probably more than the oiliness. It was kind of like, that's why I get comedonal acne, which is the ones that it's not inflammatory. It just sits under the skin and it lurks there for weeks and doesn't do anything. And it results in horrible texture. So it's actually quite difficult to clear. And that's why the retinoids, retinol in particular, was such a game changer, because I needed my skin turnover to regulate. I need my pores cleaned out, but not with anything harsh or aggressive. So that's why it worked so well for my skin type. Whereas the oil literally would have only just kind of soothed my skin, but it would not have got rid of the problems I was having.
Yeah, so more wary with that skin type. Certainly, I wouldn't be handing my eldest son out oil to put on his skin. He has the skin that I had when I was younger. Oh, Natasha, that's been great. I think we've got a handle on some of the oils that we could use. I mean, I suppose a last obvious question, and it depends on where viewers are watching from, but I think of, I'd like to buy an oil. Where should people be looking? What kind of direction should people be looking in when they want to source pure oils to use at home?
Do you mean the individual oils rather than blends? That's quite difficult because I buy mine in bulk, and they don't sell small quantities, and you don't really want to be buying
from kind of wholesalers.
5 litres of oil at a time. I think people to get through that. Let me think. There is a company called Naturally Thinking. I think they're still going. So they sell in small quantities. Their oils, I haven't bought all of the oils from there, so I don't know. I can't speak for all of them in terms of quality, but the ones I've tried from there have been quite nice.
Yeah, so people could just sort of look around based on where they are for a kind of for natural oil companies that are selling in smaller batches,
Yeah,
really.
that's what you want.
And
So
the purer oils, looking for the colors there, so avoiding anything
yeah,
that they might see that looks like it's been
read the
stripped
description.
already.
Make sure that if you want the nutrient benefits and you're going to use the oils quite quickly, look for ones that are cold pressed, ideally. If they show pictures of the color of the oils, that's always a good sign, I think, because it shows that they're more likely to be unrefined as well. Because, nowadays people say, oh, it's unrefined, but you don't know. As a consumer, you don't know unless you know what you're looking for. So it is quite important to go to a trusted seller to buy them. So I wouldn't risk getting it from Amazon personally. Naturally Thinking is one. I think there's a company called Naturally Balmy. Again, I haven't bought their carrier oils, but I have bought other things from there, and I'm pretty sure they sell oils. I don't know what the choice will be like, but I'm pretty sure they sell plant oils.
Okay, well, I've got a lot of viewers in the States and in Australia and so on, so I think that's probably a case of people having a look around locally and just knowing those pointers, what they should be looking out for to know that they're getting the real deal.
Yeah, and obviously make sure the bottles that they come in are. And that's one thing that Naturally Thinking, for example, they sell their stuff. They do use plastic bottles, but they are amber coloured generally and have opaque labels around them. So again, they thought about kind of retaining the benefits of this, whereas some sell them in clear glass or clear plastic, and they won't last as long.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you so much. We've got enough there to get us started, I think. And I'll go and dig out that product and email you with it now, so you can tell me what on earth is in it that's creating this very interesting smell.
I really want to know now. I'm almost certain it's going to be tamanu or neem, sorry.
Okay, right. Well, let's figure it out. Thank you, Natasha.
No, thanks for having me. It's been fun talking about oils. It's taken me back to where it all started all those years ago.
Some brilliant tips from Natasha there, who really knows her stuff when it comes to skincare ingredients and blending botanicals with more traditional actives to create thoughtful and effective formulations. I'll include more details in the description below, where you'll also find links to my website, honest.scot, where I explore more around skincare and how to age well, look and feel good for longer. Scroll down to the bottom of any page on my site and you can sign up for my free monthly newsletter, rounding up all the latest content from me so you don't miss a thing. Also in the description, you'll find podcast options for listening to the Honest channel on the go. And so you can easily find my weekly episodes. Do make sure to hit subscribe with the notification bell. But for now, thank you for being here today.